Hello everyone, and welcome to the Cloud Foundry Integration solution. This is a solution that is published on the VMware Solutions Exchange or Marketplace, and it integrates Cloud Foundry with vCloud Automation Center, or as it's now known, vRealize Automation. So what I'll be going over today is an overview of the solution that we've published and talk about some of the features and functionality and how we kind of solve this and how you guys would go ahead and use it. This video is going to assume that you're relatively comfortable with core Cloud Foundry concepts such as a Cloud Foundry application, a Cloud Foundry managed service, and a Cloud Foundry user provided service. In addition to that, it'll also assume that you're familiar with the vCloud Automation Center suite, including vCloud Automation Center application services, or as it was formerly known, Application Director. If you're not familiar or comfortable with either of those, you should probably stop the video now and take some time to look into some of the documentation and get comfortable with it. I'll post some links in the comment section of the video that will give some documentation so you can read up on that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what this solution has done. So the way we've implemented this is through application services, and we've used something called an external service. You can see here, if I take a look at an external service catalog, there are 4 new external services that come out of the box with this solution that are Cloud Foundry specific. Each one of these external services encompasses a certain concept or construct in Cloud Foundry and enables us to communicate with Cloud Foundry directly. So for those of you that are familiar with Cloud Foundry, you'll know that there's a couple of ways to interact with a running Cloud Foundry instance. You can either go through the web interface or you can use the command line interface. And the command line interface you will remember something similar to this. So you would log in, you provide your credentials, and you can see here on our API endpoint that I'm running against Pivotal's public instance of Cloud Foundry. And then you can see here, this is just our typical command line interface. So through this, you could look at running applications. You can look at your services that are set up and everything else. You could look at your marketplace. So pretty handy. But if you want to construct a very complex application, you don't want to do it from scratch. You don't want to do it by hand on the command line interface. So what we've done is we've written this integration piece that will allow you to model an application in application services and then push it out to Cloud Foundry and then also manage it through day 2 operations and governance and everything else. So let's see how this works. If we take a look at the first external service, that'll be the Cloud Foundry endpoint. What this does is this houses just the credentials and the API endpoint information. So the job of this external service is just to make sure that we know which Cloud Foundry instance we're pointing to, and then the credentials you'll want. And again, those are just credentials for logging in to your account. So it would just be credentials for Cloud Foundry. That basically enables all of the other external services to piggyback off of this credential and make changes without you having to type in your credentials every single time. So that one's very straightforward. The next one I want to show you is the Cloud Foundry app external service. Now this models the primary use case for Cloud Foundry. It's sort of the primary thing you'll be using. So this models any application. And again, an application can be something like a WAR file that contains your Java front end, or it can be a collection of Ruby gems or maybe Node.js. Cloud Foundry supports many build packs. Okay, so when you take a look at this, you can see here that we have quite a lot of properties listed. The good news, though, is that just to get the bare minimum running, you only need just a small portion of these. You don't actually have to fill all these in, but we have provided all of the various Cloud Foundry options that they expose through application services, so that if you do want to really tweak your applications, or you consider yourself a power user, you'll be able to do that through this UI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through all of the various properties that we have and kind of talk about what they're for and what they would be set to. So you can see the first one here is the CLI URL. That's the actual URL to download the command line interface for the transient virtual machine. The reason that we have this as a property is you can see here the one I've picked is for 64-bit operating system. But let's say in your environment all of your templates are all 32-bit, and you don't really care since it's just running a command line interface. You may want to use the 32-bit one. Maybe you've got your own command line interface hosted locally. You don't want to go out to the cloud. So we just provide a way for you to stick in what command line interface you're going to use. The second one you've seen before is just the API endpoint. So that's going to be the Cloud Foundry running instance. As I said before, we're using run.pivotal.io for our example. And then you can see some other constructs that are specific to Cloud Foundry. So the next one is the space, which is the subtenant division. You can see that I've left this blank here, and the reason is because we actually override that at the deployment environment level. So there's a concept of, I'll show you. You can see here when I logged in, it asked me which space I wanted to be in. And in our example, we had a production environment and a non-production environment. So this is just an easy way for you to take a blueprint and reuse it, and all you would have to change is your space, and you could take something and maybe you've got it in a dev environment and you really want to push it to production, then you can do that. Okay, so the next two, username and password, self-explanatory. These are left blank because they're actually going to be linked in to that endpoint external service that I showed you at the beginning, so you don't have to put them in again. Okay, so at this point now we're going to get down to specific Cloud Foundry constructs. So you can see here we've got the app name. That's obviously going to be the name of the application that's going to be pushed out to Cloud Foundry. And then we've got the domain and host name. So Cloud Foundry will actually set those for you automatically based on the Cloud Foundry instance and its configuration if you don't specify them. But if you want to override them, you want to use your own domain you've got, or maybe your own host name, you can do that. And you can see that these aren't required, so if you're just trying to get this up and running as a proof of concept, leave it blank, let it do its thing. The next one is the artifact. So this is obviously the most important piece. This is the artifact that's going to be consumed, whether it's a war, jar, ear, or perhaps it's a zip file containing your Ruby gems and your manifest, or another zip file containing your Node.js. So with the various types of build packs that Cloud Foundry supports, if it's a Java build pack, you can just give it the war file. But if it's any other type, you'll need to use a zip file that houses the directory. So if you've got multiple files that Cloud Foundry is expecting to push, the way we've implemented this is just zip it up and provide the zip file. We'll do the extraction. We'll take care of everything else. Okay, so the next property is the build pack. Now, the build pack is basically how Cloud Foundry is going to figure out what kind of content this is and how it's going to serve it up. You can leave it blank, but as an example, you're free to override if you want. Let's say that you have a Java application and Cloud Foundry's default is to use Tomcat, but maybe your application really wants to run JBoss. So you could provide a URL to a JBoss build pack, and then when Cloud Foundry spun this up, it would use that build pack instead of its default. Again, you can leave this blank, but it's just nice to have. Okay, so the next two are around resourcing. So we've got memory limits and disk limits. Those are really straightforward things, 256 M for megabyte, and then G's for gigabyte. So you can specify that if you want. The next one is the number of instances. So by default, we leave this blank, which Cloud Foundry will take to mean as one instance. You're free to specify one, it won't hurt anything, or you can specify multiple if that's what you need. But for the most part, you shouldn't need this if you're just spinning up a quick instance. Additionally, we've also put some controls around startup timeout. If you want to give it a particular time before it fails, you can do that. Okay, so these next four are exposed bind services. So in Cloud Foundry, you can take an application and you can bind it to a service. A service would be something like a running database that Cloud Foundry has, so you would connect the two. What we've done here is you can theoretically bind X number of services to a particular application. What we've done in this example is we've exposed 4. So if you needed more than 4 for your proof of concept or your application, you would just need to add the properties here and then make a couple of minor changes to these scripts. But as it stands now, one application can be bound. And then, of course, they don't have to be in any particular order, but you could do ascending 0 through 3. Okay, and then just for the bind service, what you would actually put in here is you would put in the name of the service property. So I'll show you that later. Okay, so the next one is expose as service. So what this means is, let's say you have a running application. Let's say a web tier war file. But let's say that you also have another front-end WAR file that isn't user-facing, but it sort of acts like a service, but it's still a WAR file. It's not like a database or anything. What you can do is you can set this thing to true, this expose as service, and what it will do is when it pushes the application out to Cloud Foundry, it will also register it as a user-provided service with Cloud Foundry. That way you could bind your web tier jar file or WAR file to the front tier service. And I'll give an example of that, but it just allows you to expose any running application as a service. Okay, so if you set that to true, then you need to fill in a couple of properties. So we'll need to know the app name for the user-provided service. You can put that in. Coincidentally, if you leave it blank, what we'll do is we'll just give it the same name as the app name up here. But if you did want to have some control over that, we've exposed that. Okay, the next thing is just the UPS properties. So you might not always need this, but if you're setting this up, Cloud Foundry provides a way to provide connection parameters, let's say. So it's a JSON string that will give a series of parameters about the service you're trying to bind to. In this case, let's say we had a database. You would need to know things like the connection string. You need to know the port, the password, the database instance. So that's where you provide that in the UPS properties. The last one is the context path. This is really just an extension. So if your exposed service, let's say it exposes a REST service, right? So maybe it's a web API. But there is, you've got the URL, but then maybe your API actually lives under, this sub-extension. This allows you to put that on there, and so it'll append it when it makes any of the calls, and then provide that to Cloud Foundry. So I've put an API just as an example, but it might be blank. It might be, something much more complex than that. Okay, so those are all the properties covered in the app. So you fill these in, and then all of these scripts will do the rest, and they'll take those properties, process them, and then push the application out based on your preferences. All right, so let's talk about the next construct, which is going to be the managed service. So we just talked about the app, which is going to be your WAR file, your actual front end. But those front ends always need to connect to some sort of back end, right? So that's where managed services come in. So let me show you real quick. On the command line interface, I've done this marketplace command, and this shows all of the services that Cloud Foundry manages that they can give you. And you can see here we've got a whole host of things, like we've got SQL databases, we've also got RabbitMQ as an example. We've got Memcached. So there's a whole bunch of different stuff that your application may need to have access to that Cloud Foundry can provide. So what the managed service external service does is provide that as a construct as well. So you can model the services as well as the application and sort of spin them up together. So we'll go through the properties again. So you can see these first 5 are going to be the same on all of them. They're just the link to the command line interface, which endpoint you're running, and then credentials and the space. So let's go look at the actual unique ones for managed service. So the first thing we have here is the service name. That's exactly like the app name. There's no difference. It's just what you're going to name that service. It is worth noting, though, that services in Cloud Foundry, the names are unique only to the space that you're in. So if you could use the same name for a database over 2 spaces. But for apps, because the app is exposed with a full domain name, the apps have to be unique across the Cloud Foundry instance. So just keep that in mind when you're architecting your solution. Okay, so service type and service plan are going to be the type of service you want, database, RabbitMQ, and then this service plan is the tier. So if we go back and look at the marketplace, you can see that for each service there is a set of tiers, usually some sort of free tier, and then maybe like a small, medium, and large, and that's where you would provide that on the tier here. So one thing I've done for this example is I've actually exposed this as a selectable. So it's defaulted to ClearDB, but you can actually, it's a drop down. But your Cloud Foundry instance might not have all of the various services that run.pivotal.io does. If that's the case, you would just modify that single select parameter to include what you do have. Okay, so after that, we have this shared service computed property, which you don't need to edit, but I'll just talk about what it does. So essentially, let's say that you've got one database. You've spun up a database, but you've got two different applications that use that database. Now, you could have two different blueprints that each separately model the application, and both of those blueprints would have a node that represents the service that we want to create. Now that's all great when you want to spin up something, but let's say that you've created both of these applications. They're running in Cloud Foundry, so two applications sharing one database. Let's say one day you don't need the second application. You want to get rid of it, so you want to tear the application down. Well, you don't want to delete the service because there's still another running application that's using it. So what this property does is when we spin up this instance, we make a note that if it's already running or not. And so if it is an already running component, we deem that to be a shared component. And so when we want to do any destructive operations against this, we'll make sure that we don't tear down the database. We'll leave that alone, even if the rest of the blueprint's taken care of. And then this last parameter is just an override for that computed parameter. So let's say that you don't care if it's shared or not. If you tear down this blueprint, you want everything gone. You can just set this to true, and that will override the computed logic in this property. Okay, so that covers the managed service. There's only one construct left I want to talk about, and it's relatively simple. So this is the Cloud Foundry user-provided service construct. So I had alluded to this earlier when I talked about taking an app and exposing it as a user-provided service. That's this construct here. So if we skip past these 5 common parameters and we start taking a look at here, all a user-provided service is, it's actually analogous to an external service in application services. What that means is it's some service that Cloud Foundry doesn't have any control over, but the Cloud Foundry running application may need to get access to it. So let's say that you've got a 3-tier application. You've got a web front end, you've got a database back end, maybe like a web server too. So let's say the database itself is really secure, and you're not allowed. Maybe you've got some sort of mandate from the government or something, but you can't have it running on the public cloud. It's got to be on your private cloud. But the rest of your application is running on the public cloud. This will allow you to connect your private service to the public cloud that Cloud Foundry is hosting. So all you really do, it's really straightforward. All you do is you give it a name again. So Cloud Foundry just needs to know what the name of the service is. It'll actually register a user-provided service on its end, and all it does is sort of redirect traffic. And so the way you do that is you provide this thing called the user-defined service parameters. So again, that's just a JSON string with all the information. In the scenario I talked about where you had a database, you would just tell Cloud Foundry, okay, here's the URL, here's the port, here are the credentials to get to my private database from the public cloud. And then what Cloud Foundry will do is it'll actually make the connection it's in, so that when a request from the app needs to go talk to the database, Cloud Foundry will route that to the parameters you specified here. And then the last property is just like the other managed service. We provide a delete on teardown mechanism override if you don't want to, if you do want to destroy something that's considered to be a shared service. Okay, so that is the overview of all of the various external services. You need all of them to work, to do everything. At a minimum level, you have to have the endpoint, and then you could import maybe just the app if all you cared about were running Cloud Foundry apps but didn't want to mess with managed services or user-provided services. But I recommend to pull in all 4 because they work in concert really well together. So that concludes the end of this video. What I'm going to do next is there'll be a second video I'll post that will actually show you how to take this and then create a running blueprint and then actually deploy it to Cloud Foundry. In fact, we're publishing a second solution to the marketplace that's going to be called Spring Trader. So please look for that Spring Trader application. That will take this Cloud Foundry External Services suite and then actually apply it to a running blueprint where we've got WAR files and we actually have a reference application. If you have any questions, please feel free to email the email link in the solution on the marketplace. And thank you very much for watching.